Hello and welcome to Pastoral Ministry. I'm Dr. Mikey Mewborn, and today we're looking at the topic, the minister's family. It's good to be with you. Let's begin our study. I want to start by talking about the priority of the family. It's very important for a pastor or a minister to take care of his family. If he doesn't take care of his family, he's really not qualified to lead the church. As the Bible tells us that in 1 Timothy chapter 3, as well as Titus chapter 1, the pastor or the minister should never lead the body of Christ if they can't lead the home. And so how does the minister lead his family? Well, he leads them by taking them to Jesus. He leads them by leading them through biblical principles and the right kind of godly values that God gives us. And so we're going to look at some of those things today. As we begin, I want to start by talking about expressing love for the family. So one of the things we must do is make time for individual family members. And so how do you do that? It's going to be a big question, but you only have one family, and so we can't mess it up. We can't afford to mess it up. There are many things in this life that'll take our attention away from our family, but it's important to realize that so goes the family, so goes the church, or so goes the church, so goes the family. So a lot of this really matters. But we must, as ministers and as pastors, we must think a lot about the church in light of how we think about our families, how we take care of them. And then what we do with the church is an expression or an overflow of what we do already in the home. So it's very important that we make time for individual family members and do whatever we need to do to be there for them. Remember special events. Think about birthdays, games, recitals, etc. Those types of things are very important when it comes to individual family members. Find out what is important to the individual family members as well. So if it's a concert or if it's some play or drama that they like to go to, whatever it might be, listen to the family members, because whatever they're saying might be a bigger deal to them than we think. I like what Dr. Phillips had to say about this. They need to hear, see, and experience our love, and that is right on. Next, I want to talk about probably one of the most important topics of pastoral ministry, and it's ministering to your spouse, to your wife. Because if we don't minister well to our wives, we're going to have a huge issue on our hands. Not only are we going to be out of the will of God, but also we're going to be struggling to take care of the church as well. And so a lot of people have said it this way, and jokingly they have said, well, if my wife leaves me, I'm going with her, and kind of make a joke out of things like that. And I get it, and that makes sense. If ministry gets to a point where your wife says, this is not it, and I'm out of here. Well, a lot of pastors would say, well, I'm going with her, and I only can have one wife, but I can have multiple ministries, and so they think like that. I think that's probably a very good way to think about it, but making sure we minister to our wives is very important. A loving husband recognizes his wife has many needs: spiritual needs, emotional needs, intellectual needs, physical needs. The first one, spiritual needs, well, the pastor or the minister is also the spiritual leader of a home anyways, and so he needs to lead spiritually in the home. So that means his wife. And if you think of it this way, his wife is also a member of the church, so she needs direction, and she needs good pastoring, and she needs guidance, and so that's going to come from her husband just the same. Also, emotional needs. There's a huge toll that the ministry takes not only on a pastor's family, but especially to a pastor's wife. And so, if there's something going on emotionally that needs to be dealt with, or the pastor needs to show some kind of attention to that, he needs to make sure that he does that. Intellectual needs. One of the things that I have noticed over time is that people have a huge Wives sometimes have a calling on their lives that guides them to learn more and be challenged more, whether that's through greater biblical knowledge or deeper knowledge of the Bible, or it's a deeper knowledge in something else that might be another area of life. It could be even a secular area. And sometimes our wives are called to learn. My wife has been called to study more in the medical field, and so she has a heart for that, and also she needs support in that. And so I've always tried to encourage her in those areas. And then physical needs. We can talk about the romantic side of it like we will in just a little bit, but there's something even more important we have to think about with physical needs. For instance, what if your wife had an illness or some kind of disease or sickness that came over her and she needed great support? We take vows a lot of times. Wedding vows can often say, it's that we'll say something like, for better, for worse, that we'll be with somebody no matter what's coming at them. And so we say we're always going to take care of our spouses. And so that's one of the things that we can look at there for physical needs. What are the physical needs? Of course, we can look at other things, like in the Maslow's law of things that you need in this life. We can look at those things, such as water and protection and comfort and things like that. But physical needs are very important when you think about what a person really needs. So let's talk next about the romantic side of it. Wives need romance in their lives. They do. And so how husbands express that's a very important thing. So we need to express emotional, spiritual, and physical love. Now, we've talked a little bit about emotional and spiritual in the past, but let's talk more about physical love. And this is going to be more about being there for your wife and taking care of her, and definitely offering her the kind touches and the hugs and all those things that are very important. But one of the things that I often tell pastors, especially young ministers, date your wife. Date her. Make sure that she feels loved and that she feels cherished, and that you're taking her out and doing special things for her. Be sure to remember anniversaries and those special days that are so meaningful to her. Date your wife. I can't say that enough. That is one of the most important things that you can do. Also, wives need to grow spiritually. Help her fulfill her calling, whatever that is. So some wives feel called to work with the nursery. Some wives feel called to work with women's ministry. Some wives feel called to work in the music ministry. But one of the big things about this is that your wife is a member of the church. And so pastors' wives are members of the church, just like anybody else is a member. They're not usually paid for what they do, but they're definitely there, and they're definitely some kind of doing some kind of support role. But we can't look at it in a way of saying, well, you're getting 2 for 1 when a pastor's being hired on, or a minister's being hired on. You're not getting 2 people for the price of 1. Sometimes it seems like that because the wife is so involved, but that's not the case. We need to always think of it this way. Wives are growing spiritually. They need that guidance. They need that encouragement, maybe helping them find some programs that could help them develop in that way, and also creating Bible studies that affect the whole church, especially your family and your wife, especially. And so that's important. Wives need protection from unrealistic expectations. This happens too often. When a pastor is hired or a minister is hired, the expectation not only goes to the high expectations, not only go to the pastor, but they also fall onto the wife of the pastor. And so what you have to do is protect from that. You've got to set some boundaries on the front end. And I think when you start going to a new church, or you start serving in a new church, you got to set those boundaries right at the beginning with the pastor search team, because the pastor search team needs to know where your wife is in all of this. And I've done this multiple times going into a new church and a new church staff. I set some boundaries, and I said, my wife is an incredible church member. She's going to be here as much as she possibly can. She'll be very involved, but she's going to do that on her own. And she's going to have those expectations expectations on her own. God's going to call her. It might be a new ministry that she's going to be leading in that area, but you need to let God call her to do that. And I've told them many times on the front end, you're not hiring me and her, you're hiring me, but she's going to be a great member of the church. So be careful about putting those expectations on her. And they received it so well. It's always been a good thing. Wives need protection from harsh criticism. This is another biggie. Too often, wives get more criticism than even the pastor does. And here's why. Because many people are afraid to go to the pastor about what the struggle is. They're afraid to go. And so instead they'll go to the pastor's wife because it doesn't seem as scary. It seems like this is more, wives would be more welcoming, that kind of thing. And so what happens is the wife knows a lot of the criticism that comes not only toward her, but also toward her family, her kids, and even her husband. And so what happens there is she's carrying that load that she does not need to be carrying. And so oftentimes I will make it known to guys like the deacons or Sunday school teachers about those types of conversations that just don't need to happen. And if you can kill gossip and any kind of slanderous talk, if you can kill that on the front end of a church, you can keep it down throughout the life of that church. But if you let it go and you maybe take part in it, it's going to cause more problems than you can ever imagine. So protect your wife from harsh criticism as much as possible. It'll go a long way for you. Next, wives need a place to call home. Homemaking is a wonderful expression of a wife. Wives have a very unique gift. I truly believe that wives are gifted, moms are gifted to be homemakers in a very special way. Even if they have careers, even if they've got a lot going on and they've got jobs outside of ministry, more of a secular role, I've noticed that they love to be homemakers and they create a great place, a welcoming place for whoever comes. And so we need to have a place to call home. And so whatever it looks like to do that, we got to do it well. I think oftentimes that could be an apartment, it could be a house, it could be a parsonage, it could be all kinds of things. But it just needs to be a place that they can call home and that they can use their homemaking skills. Wives need financial security. Finances destroy marriages, and so we must be aware of the pitfalls that come at us from financial issues. And so I would say we need to do whatever we can to make sure that the financial aspect of the relationship and the financial status of a couple, we don't get into a bind. We don't get into a bad place. Too often, pastors are such generous people that they just want to give and give and give, and they don't have a lot to use to take care of their home or their family because they're giving so much. And you got to make sure that you take care of your family, that you don't have financial issues because you're not dealing with that well. So that's another thing to think about. Make sure the finances are set and everything is set up there. And I would say this, as the Bible tells us in Ephesians 5:25, husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. Love is such a huge part of it. So take the time, be intentional, love your wives, love them well. Now let's talk a little bit about the minister's family and setting the example. And I love this slide. We've kind of looked at this before, and I think it's a good one to kind of set us up for where we're going. 1 Corinthians 11:1. Be imitators of me as I am of Christ. I love those words by Paul. They speak to us very strongly about how Paul treated the disciples that came under him, and he treated them very much like his own children. And so Paul set the example, the standard, the boundaries, and the tone. And so he made it very clear that we need to be careful to set the example for all people, that they know what the standards are, the boundaries, and not only that, but the attitude upon which we do ministry. Because if we don't have the right attitude, it's going to be a mess. All right, the next thing is nurturing your children. And I want to talk about this because this goes right into the same idea of setting the example. If you're not showing your kids what to do, they're not going to know what to do. They're going to mimic you. They are sponges and they are watching everything that you do. So if there are terrible words coming out of your mouth, get ready. Your kids are going to be sharing those. Your kids, as they grow up, begin to give you a report card of how well you're doing as a parent because they will start mimicking you, and it happens all the time. And so we've got to set the example. We've got to show them the way to walk and the way to walk, show them how to walk, where to walk, and the way to walk. And it's so important to do this and do it well. Spend time. So set the example, spend time with them, be with them. It's not enough just to say, I was around them. Make sure that the time spent with them is good quality time, face-to-face time, talking to one another. I know parents that are actually with their kids a lot of the time, but they're never talking to them. Instead, they're on the phone. Instead, they're talking to other people while their kids are around, but they don't spend time with them. Sit and listen. Sit and listen. I've shared this in previous teachings about leadership development. It's the idea of no one learns anything by speaking. If you want to learn your kids, you want to know more about your kids, you sit and you listen. And as you listen, you'll learn their heart. You'll learn those fun things about them. You'll learn what they've picked up on. So it's really neat. And show interest in what they're doing. I know that not all fathers are interested in music, in the same way not all fathers are interested in sports. I know that. And fathers have different they grew up with different inclinations and different paths that they've taken in their lives. But if your child shows an interest in something, we need to come alongside them and say, hey, can I encourage you in this? What is it that you're very interested in? I want to be there with you. So show interest. It's very important to do that. Don't just play it off and say, okay, well, I put in my time, whatever, and then treat it like it doesn't matter. Show interest in what they're doing. Another thing is show up. Show up for what's needed. So as I said earlier, whether it's a recital or it's a game one of your kids are in, or practice possibly, if it's a play at school, or if it's some kind of recognition about them, show up and be there for that. Be there. Shut up. I think that's another great thing to say here. Just shut up and just listen. Be a part of, and that goes with the slide before, but there's something to say when you just take in. Let your kid use his or her imagination. Let them use their talking, their ability to talk and to share with you what's going on. Ask them about school and just be quiet. Seize the opportunity. What's the opportunity that's right in front of you? How can you teach them something, but also how can you learn something together? I think that's always fun. And then secure them. This is another thing that I think is very, very helpful. And when you think of secure them, what does this mean? It means to protect them. It means to show them that you're in control, to show them that you're going to take care of them no matter what. You're going to be that great security umbrella for them. But also, this is going to bring in this idea of discipline. The more a child is disciplined well and loved well and guided well and directed well, the more they'll understand what the expectations are, and if it's a consistent type of discipline and a consistent type of upbringing that they were receiving, they're going to be so grateful for it. I heard one of the greatest comments I've possibly heard was in a class one time when I was talking about disciplining a child, and I already knew kind of the feeling that one of the students was sharing, because he said this out loud. He said, when I'm disciplining my little daughter, he said, oftentimes after really good discipline and consistent good discipline, it always ends up in some of the greatest snuggles and cuddles. And he was making a great point, because he said, when you discipline well, your kids receive it well, and they love you, and they embrace you, and they're happy with you, and they're grateful that you're their parent. I think that's important. So this is the idea of love and discipline. I want to just give you these thoughts. Love and discipline. Decide, here's maybe some four points to this. Decide family rules. What are the rules that you're going to put out there that your family will have for certain things? Hey, here are the rules. Number 2, set the example. How do they do it? Number 3, praise good behavior. Always praise. Positive reinforcement. You're doing a great job. This is the way to go. And then number 4, set limits and consequences. Set those limits and consequences, because when you set them early on, they will respect you more. I often tell people that everyone loves rules. Everyone does. We love them in some way or another, whether it's driving down the road and there's lines on the highway and you say, man, I'm so glad that we have these lines on the highway. I'm so glad there are certain rules to driving because it keeps people safe. I'm glad that there's rules for driving when it comes to speed limits. I'm glad there's rules for driving when it comes to stoplights and stop signs and whatever it might be. I'm glad there are those things. We even love rules in sports. The game of baseball is only wonderful because of the rules of baseball. If you took those rules completely out and you just said, okay, they can be whatever you want. You don't have to play with a baseball anymore. You can actually play with a football. Can you imagine playing baseball with a football? Or can you imagine if there's no such thing as a foul ball? Or can you imagine where the bases, when you're running toward the bases, they're different every time when you run to them because you can change the rules every time? It would just be a horrible game. It would be inconsistent and no one would want to play it, and it would just completely die quickly. It'd be the same thing about any other sport. Think of hockey playing with a different type of, like a ball or something like that. That would be very hard to do. Or playing football with a golf ball. I mean, that's very hard to do. And you just can't imagine that, because it doesn't make any sense. So we have these rules and they're really good for us. And it's important because there's security in the rules. Hebrews chapter 12 is a great chapter that talks about discipline. Here's part of it. It says, the Lord disciplines him whom he loves. God disciplines those whom he loves. I think this is one of the greatest assurance doctrines in the entire Bible. You know, we talk about assurance sometimes that God, once a person is a child of God, they are assured of their salvation. Well, one of the great ways that God assures us of our salvation is he disciplines us. When we get out of line, the Holy Spirit will convict us of that. He'll show us that we're in our wrong. And sometimes he'll bring forth a discipline that we need to really deal with. And sometimes it really hurts. But it's God saying to us, I love you, and I'm always going to be here, and I'm going to take care of you, and I'm going to get you in line because I know what's good for you. I know what's right because he loves us. Well, this has been the Minister's Family, and as you can see, it's important to take care of the family. So we got to do whatever we can to take care of the family. I believe God equips us to do this, and I believe God demands that we do this. All right? Well, it's good to be with you today. God bless you. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.